Welcome back to the Siri Poetry Library. I'm your host, Ann Siri, and we're finishing the Goondock Saints with a poem about Mikey Walsh called Our Time. Wife and kids never ask why we live in the house I grew up in, why I never play golf, go yachting, why I feel more at home working late at the museum than attending charity galas. The children went to public school, community college. I never let them forget where they came from. Salvage pirate ship, endless appearances, book deals, movie rides, a show on Discovery Channel, little action figures that look nothing like us. It sinks in late nights as I walk the halls of the Copperpot Wing. Treasure map behind glass, some swords, cannons, other bits of this and that. Some nights I catch kids, even adults, trying to sneak onto the Inferno after hours. Some believe it to be good luck to stand on that deck, look through the glass ceiling at the night sky, and dream. I often stand at the wishing well, trying to recall what I said to my friends, the Goonies, something about a test in another school, sky over another town, that it was our time. I was afraid they'd leave me down that well, even more afraid they'd follow me to the end. Kept doubting myself, but when I stood face to skull with a court jester turned pirate, only then I started believing. One-Eyed Willie's diary spoke of snares and betrayals, a giant octopus, runaway prisoners waging war for years, giving the map to a cabin boy as mutineers closed in, and at last realizing that while he alone survived the uprising, the crew poisoned his wine. His last written words struck me. The boy has the map. Someday one will return to take what was never ours. It's his time up there and our time down here. William B. Porterbell, June 7th, 1638. Over 30 years passed since we found Willie's ship. I joined old friends on stage at Astoria High. Jake and Francis Fratelli, now honorary Goonies, tell stories of the old days and how far they've come. Mouth plays his music. Steph reads poems from her new book. Chunk brings stories of him and Sloth at WWE. Data shows off invention. Brand talks about his Senate re-election, but dodges questions about a presidential run. Andy unveils a new piece from her art gallery, a mural of the Goonies standing on the beach, watching the Inferno drift out to sea. I stare at the painting as I walk to the podium. Suddenly, years, fortune, and fame drifted away. I was suddenly that scared 12-year-old boy again. Soaked, freezing, knee-deep in the waters of the well. Dreams of copper, nickel, and zinc swirling at my feet. Decades ago, we risked everything to find a ghost ship. We gained a fortune, but lost it, so we could see our parents again. Coast Guard picked up the Inferno and gave it back to us with neither coin nor cannon touched. That old boat gave us so much, but we were already the wealthiest people in Astoria. All the places I've traveled, people I've met, I've never felt richer than the day we saw our families on that shore. Money is in Switzerland, but the fortune is in my home with my wife and kids. It's in this room. I said some words at the bottom of a well to the people sharing this stage, when all of them, including me, were about ready to give up. We pressed on, no matter the cost. I couldn't imagine seeing sky over another town, taking a test in some other school. Our parents did the best they could, but it was our turn. I reflect often on those crazy kids wandering dark caverns all those years ago. It was their time, down there. I look at us now, our families, all of you listening. I realize up here, it's our time. January 22nd, 2015. All poems rewritten and polished up, 11/25/20. Well, what do I say about Mikey? Mikey's a great character. The easiest to connect to emotionally, so there's a lot to mine there. There's a lot to write about. I like the idea of him taking over his father's job with the museum, basically taking care of everything that they discovered in the old days. And still the leader. He was always younger, but he was always more of a leader than his older brothers or the older kids. And he wasn't the type of leader that he was so intimidating. He wasn't like a forceful leader, but he had a knack for leadership without... There's a certain vulnerability that he has. It's not like he was basically... He didn't push around the other kids. He got them to do whatever he wanted to do. He talked them into anything, but he was never forceful about it. He was always kind. And I think what it was his way of just daydreaming and just, what if there could be a ship, and what if we can save the Goondocks? And it was that really pushed the kids. It was that kind of leadership. It was inspiring to the other guys. And then it all culminates in the speech down in the well, which again, he talks even Andy into following them. She's not into it at all. And he's able to convince even her that they need to save the Goondocks. So again, I have a history with this film. I first saw it in the theaters in 1985. I was about 6 maybe. On the advice of we were going to see Back to the Future, or we wanted to see Back to the Future, which we eventually saw on video a year later and loved. But it was more of a movie for older kids. So my grandmother's tenant, of all people, said to her, "You know what movie your grandkids would like? The Goonies." I took my daughter to it, and it's really, great for kids. As opposed to Back to the Future was more for like teenagers and adult kids. She says, "I think they would have more fun watching the Goonies." So we went with Grandma, Aunt Rose, my mom. I believe my sister was with us, and my 2 brothers. We went to see it at this movie theater in Staten Island, an old 2-screener by the mall, which is not there anymore. And I saw this movie, and I was just completely fascinated with it. I had never seen a movie, and I didn't actually see E.T. yet. I saw E.T. in 86 because I was too young when it came out, and they would re-release it like every 2 years. Before video, they used to re-release movies every 1 to 2 years. So I actually didn't see E.T. until a year later, until 1986. So when I went to see the Goonies, that's the first time I really watched a movie that I could remember that was featuring kids, just maybe 5, 6 years older than me. And that just was such an amazing concept. Because, I love Star Wars, I loved Indiana Jones and movies like that, but those were all adults getting into adult situations. So to see a movie that focused on kids was like something I had never seen before. Also, too, you got to understand, in the 80s, there was practically no Disney. I'll say it again. In the 80s, there was practically no Disney. There was no Disney Channel. There was not a lot of shows featuring kids except for some of the sitcoms. And, they were okay, but, it wasn't like this. This was like kids getting into, an action, like Indiana Jones style action, but they were kids. And I'm like, this is amazing. I had never seen anything like it as a young kid. And it was just a very fond memory of going to see that in the theater with the whole family. And afterwards, we went to Farrell's for hamburgers in the Staten Island Mall. Again, it's not there anymore. That was a great hangout for kids in the 80s in Staten Island. And then we went to Time Out Arcade, which was right across from Farrell's in the mall. Grandma gave us a little bag of quarters, and me and my brothers got rid of those quarters quickly at Time Out Arcade, which was the arcade that I grew up in. The one that's the focus of my other poem, The Last Arcade, that's a different arcade. That's in New Dorp, which I didn't really go to that arcade. That one closed pretty early in the mid-'80s. But Time Out was the place. That was the arcade that I knew growing up. That was the place because it was right in the mall. It was very convenient. So, watch this movie on VHS. One of my favorite memories was my grandma's brother used to actually tape movies for us. It's quite illegal. But he used to get upset because videotapes used to cost so much money back in the day because it was a rental industry, not a sales industry. So tapes used to cost $30 to $40. We paid $60 for Return of the Jedi in 1986. $60. And he always felt like the children should see more movies and they shouldn't have to like go without. So we had a VCR, but we didn't really have a big VHS library because they were expensive. So Grandma's brother, Uncle John, used to copy tapes from RKO Video, which is not around anymore. And she would visit for Christmas, and she would drive in from, they would come to Staten Island, then they would go into Brooklyn to see her brothers and sisters, and he would always give Grandma a box of tapes. And I remember it was the Friday before Christmas vacation, and I remember walking home from school and seeing Grandma's car in the driveway and being excited because Grandma's come in for the holidays, and she had a box of tapes from Uncle John. And in that box was Ghostbusters, all the movies from 1984, from like 84, 85, were all coming on video in 86. So we had Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. We had Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Goonies, Gremlins. I'm like, this was like the greatest day of my life. And Goonies was one that me and my brother watched over and over and over again. And don't worry, Warner Brothers, we did buy the DVD. And we did buy the Blu-ray. And I even bought the film digitally because I needed to always have it. I needed to have the Goonies with me everywhere I go. So it's on my phone. So don't worry, Warner Brothers. We more than paid for that movie. And to this day, I saw it again in theaters in 2014. At Brooklyn Academy of Music, I went with my good pal, Christopher Bly. And at Brooklyn Academy of Music, we saw a beautiful 35 millimeter print of the Goonies in 2015, which was amazing to see. Because again, I hadn't seen it in the theaters in 30 years. And the magic of cinema. And even though I'd seen it so many times on video is not the same. TV is not the same. Watching it on your phone is not the same. You sit in a theater with a whole bunch of fans and you're into it and you're laughing at all the jokes and everything is happening. And it's just such a beautiful experience to see it in a theater, which I recommend highly. I did see it a couple of years later. I went with my nephews and we saw it on a big screen digitally. And, people argue 35 versus digital. As long as it's in a theater and you're there with your friends or you're there with family, that's really the magic of it all. It isn't so much the presentation. I mean, I like 35 millimeter if you can get it, but I'll see it any way they show it. Even if it's in a VHS with a room full of fans, that's all that really matters. So yes, it's definitely great on the big screen, and it holds up. A lot of 80s movies are miraculous in that they're dated and they're sort of quaint in certain ways, but they're so original and they're so of their time. And the thing that's amazing about the 80s and why you can't really reboot much 80s stuff correctly, you need to do it as a TV series like Cobra Kai, where you can go into all these details about things. Because if you try and reboot it as a movie, it only worked in the 80s. And that's it. It wouldn't have worked in the 70s, and it wouldn't have worked in the 90s. But what's so great about those classic 80s films, the John Hughes films, the Spielberg films, the Dante films, things like that are so of their time, they can't exist anywhere else. They're perfect for right where they are. And I am so glad that The Goonies is one that I grew up with. We tried to show it at the film club, which me and my other great friend, Daniel Gaeta, tried to show it at the film club at the College of Staten Island. And we had issues with our advisor, who, again, was another one of these elitists that didn't understand why we were showing The Goonies in the film club. A club run by students. He wanted us to show Godard and things like that. And I like those movies. I like Breathless, Jules and Jim. But, Jules and Jim, that might have been Truffaut. Whatever. But he wanted us to show all these art films and things like that. He wanted us to show, I love Rome Open City. I love Bicycle Thieves. But college kids in the early 2000s are not going to want to sit through those movies. They want to watch movies they grew up with. So we showed like Star Wars, Superman, and then we show a few current ones, like at the time they were current, Detroit Rock City, and we wanted to show Empire Records. We didn't get to it, which is one of my absolute favorites. And again, finding significance in the insignificant. It's a movie that a lot of people hate, but I think Empire Records is amazing. But we tried to show the Goonies, and so much so that these elitists and these people who thought that they actually locked us out of the projecting room. We couldn't show the film to the students, and 5 students showed up, and the projector room was locked because they didn't want us to show what they called schlock, the Goonies. And it's insane because, you know, the movie at that point was about 15 years old, and it was in 2000, I believe, we wanted to show it. And it had a long-lasting impact, and there were fans that wanted to see it. But the problem with film school, which if anyone is watching this right now and you're in film school, quit. Quit. Drop out of NYU. Drop out of Columbia. Do not go to film school. Take that money that you were going to spend on film school, get together with a couple of friends and make your own movie. Move to Los Angeles if you have to. Do not go to film school, because let me tell you, from a former production assistant, everything you learn in film school can be learned out of a book or on a YouTube video or from experience. There is nothing you're going to learn in film school. Absolutely nothing. So if you're going to Columbia or NYU or any of those schools, drop out. Get out of there. Get the hell out. Believe me, take it from a graduate of the film program at the College of Staten Island. Film school is absolutely useless.